Good evening, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring classicist here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to start over from the beginning and discuss pleasure from a couple of other angles. This is book 10 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, chapter 4. We're going to call it the beginning of pleasure. So, let's start. We may ascertain the nature and quality of pleasure more clearly if we start again from the beginning. Now, the act of sight appears to be perfect at any moment of its duration. It does not require anything to supervene later in order to perfect its specific quality. But pleasure also appears to be a thing of this nature. For it is a whole, and one cannot at any moment put one's hand on a pleasure, which will only exhibit its specific quality perfectly if its duration be prolonged. It follows also that pleasure is not a form of motion, for every motion or process of change also involves duration, and is a means to an end. For instance, the process of building is a house, and it is perfect when it has effected its end. Hence, a motion is perfect either when viewed over the whole time of its duration, or at the moment when its end has been achieved. The several motions occupying portions of the time of the whole are imperfect, and different in kind from the whole and from each other. For instance, in building a temple, the fitting together of the stones is a different process from the fluting of a column, and both are different from the construction of the temple as a whole. And whereas the building of a temple is a perfect process, for nothing more is required to achieve the end proposed, laying the foundation and constructing the triglyphs are imperfect processes, since each produces only a part of the design. They are therefore specifically different from the construction of the whole, and it is not possible to lay one's finger on a motion specifically perfect at any moment of the process of building, but only, if at all, in the whole of its duration. And the same is true of walking, and of the other forms of locomotion. For if locomotion is motion from one point in space to another, and if this is of different kinds, flying, walking, leaping, and the like, and not only so, but if there are differences in walking itself, for the terminal points of a race cause are not the same as those of a portion of a course, nor are those of one portion the same as those of another, nor is traversing this line the same as traversing that one. For the runner does not merely travel along a certain line, but travels along a line that is in a different place, and this line is different from that. Hopefully you can tell me what that means. No, I'm joking. What he's saying is that motion is different because you're moving from one place to another, but that doesn't mean that the same motion, like a runner, multiple runners that line up and run around a track, they actually travel along different paths, and those all are different motions in that case. However, for a full treatment of the subject of motion, I must refer to another work, and he's referring to his book, Physics, Aristotle's book, Physics. But it appears that a motion is not perfect at every moment, but that many movements which make up the whole are imperfect, and different from each other in kind, inasmuch as the terminal points of a movement constitute a specific quality. Now, the specific quality of pleasure, on the contrary, is perfect at any moment. It is clear, therefore, that pleasure is not the same as motion, and that it is a whole and something perfect. So because pleasure is the same without its specific quality doesn't change, that makes it different from motion. This may also be inferred from the fact that a movement necessarily occupies a space of time, whereas a feeling of pleasure does not, for every moment of pleasurable consciousness is a perfect whole. Those considerations also show that it is a mistake to speak of pleasure as the result of a motion or of a process of generation, for we cannot so describe everything, but only such things as are divided into parts and are not wholes. Thus, an act of sight, a geometrical point, an arithmetical unit are not the result of a process of generation. Pleasure, therefore, also is not the result of a motion or process, for pleasure is a whole. Again, inasmuch as each of these senses act in relations to its object and acts perfectly when it is in good condition and directed to the finest of the and objects that belong to it, for this seems to be the best description of perfect activity, it being assumed to make no difference whether it be the sense itself that acts or the organ in which the sense resides. It follows that the activity of any of the senses is at best when the sense organ, being in the best condition, is directed to the best of its objects, and this activity will be the most perfect and the pleasantest. For each sense has a corresponding pleasure, as also have thought and speculation, and its activity is pleasantest when it is most perfect, and most perfect when the organ is in good condition, and when it is directed to the most excellent of its objects, and the pleasure perfects the activity. The pleasure does not, however, perfect the activity in the same way as the object perceived and the sensory faculty, if good perfect it, just as health and the physician are not in the same way the cause of being healthy. But the pleasure perfects the activity, not as the fixed disposition does, by being already present in the agent, but as a supervening perfection, like the bloom of health in the young and vigorous. So long, therefore, as both objects thought of or perceived in subject discerning or judging are as they should be, there will be pleasure in the activity. Since while both the passive and the active parties to a relationship remain the same in themselves and unaltered in their relation to one another, the same result is naturally produced. How is it then that no one can feel pleasure continuously? Which that is a good question. If you are doing something pleasurable for a while, it's fun at first, but eventually you get sick of it. Like eating too much candy. Perhaps it is due to fatigue, since no human faculty is capable of uninterrupted activity, and therefore pleasure also is not a continuous, because it accompanies the activity of the faculties. It is for the same reason that some things please us when new, but cease to give so much pleasure later. This is because at first the mind is stimulated, and acts vigorously in regard to the object, as in the case of sight. When we look at something intently, but afterwards the activity is less vigorous, and our attention relaxes, and consequently the pleasure also fades, it might be held that all men seek to obtain pleasure, because all men desire life. Life is a form of activity, and each man exercises his activity upon those objects, and with those faculties which he likes the most. For example, the musician exercises his sense of hearing upon musical tunes, the student his intellect upon problems of philosophy, and so on. And the pleasure of these activities perfects the activities, and therefore perfects life, which all men seek. Men have good reason, therefore, to pursue pleasure, since it perfects for each his life, which is a desirable thing. The question whether we desire life for the sake of pleasure, or pleasure for the sake of life, need not be raised for the present. In any case, they appear to be inseparably united, for there is no pleasure without activity, and also no perfect activity without its pleasure. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 4. One of his denser chapters, but definitely some valuable stuff in there, like the fact that all men seek pleasure because it helps to perfect our lives. That's a good takeaway. Anyways, what are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, I love y'all.